There are an astonishing number of pipes, cables, conduits, and other facilities buried beneath us, and every year, thousands of them are accidentally damaged. The Canadian Common Ground Alliance's Damage Information Reporting Tool, or DIRT, reported over 4,900 damage events across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia in 2014, at an estimated cost of $525 million. This is a staggering amount, which can affect a company's ability to operate due to high claims costs, lost contracts, or future work. Should this happen, the subsequent financial impact may affect you and your ability to provide for your family. The bottom line is that the cost of not safely performing ground disturbance work can bury everyone involved. So what is a ground disturbance? There's a highly detailed definition in the Alberta OH&S Guide. However, in basic terms, if the ground is disturbed any time a work operation moves or displaces the existing surface of the ground, it is considered ground disturbance. This would include excavating, hand digging, tunneling, fencing, and a host of other activities where the soil is moved. There are some activities where the soil is moved and does not count as ground disturbance. These include routine road maintenance, agricultural cultivation that is not deeper than 450 millimeters over a pipeline, and hand digging not deeper than 300 millimeters and where the soil over a buried facility is not permanently removed. You can check the Alberta OH&S Handbook for a complete list of ground disturbance activities, as well as supervisor and work responsibilities. One key responsibility for both groups is adequate training that covers all the rules, regulations, and legal requirements that must be met before the ground is disturbed. It's suggested that companies implement a competency program to ensure that supervisors, workers, and operators are competent to perform the work safely. Successful ground disturbance begins with effective planning, long before any tool or piece of equipment penetrates the surface. Planning includes the method and depth of the dig, what equipment will be used, and the location of any underground facilities. Locating facilities is free through Alberta One Call, which can be accessed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, either by phone or online at clickbeforeyoudig.com. Alberta One Call coordinates with facility operators to locate and mark the type and position of your underground facilities in the area of your dig. This takes at least 2 working days, so plan accordingly. Remember, you cannot begin a dig until facility operators have confirmed the location of their services. It is your right to request confirmation in writing, and it is highly recommended that you do so. Did you know this same process applies to homeowners who might be putting up a fence or planting a tree? It is the only way to avoid having to pay fines or repair costs if you accidentally cut an underground service in the backyard. The information contained within your locates gives a good general idea of where underground services are and which direction they run. But you still need to confirm the depth and exact location through a non-destructive process like hand digging, daylighting, also referred to as hydrovacking, pit holing, or slot trenching. If exposed utilities need to be suspended and supported, you'll need to determine the correct material and method for suspension, and always get the utility representative's written approval before proceeding. Once the work starts, it is the ground disturber's responsibility to make sure the location marks are not upset, removed, or otherwise altered. If they are, an additional locate may be required to re-establish hand exposed zones, control zones, and safety zones. Did you know the hand exposed zone is 1 meter on either side of the locate marks for all buried facilities, except pipelines and some buried electrical facilities? For pipelines, the hand exposed zone is 5 meters, and some operators of buried high-voltage electrical facilities require distances of greater than 1 meter. When a piece of equipment is used to dig anywhere near a buried facility, it is critical that the equipment operator has a spotter. Both the operator and the spotter must be trained and competent for their task. They need to keep in constant communication and visual contact with each other, as the spotter will observe and monitor the equipment operator's movements. The spotter's sole responsibility is to provide critical feedback to ensure the operator keeps a safe distance from buried facilities. Lack of effective communication could quickly result in severe consequences. Once digging begins, employers are required to stabilize the soil for excavations deeper than 1.5 meters. This is done by using cutbacks, sloping the soil, or shoring the excavation. Depending on the soil type, cutbacks will range from 30 to 45 degrees of slope measured vertically. The looser the soil, the more cutback is required. Particular care must be taken in or near areas where the soil has been backfilled or previously excavated. If an obstruction next to the excavation prevents proper sloping, then a temporary protective structure may have to be used to shore the soil. This is also the case where the soil is extremely loose. If such an excavation exceeds 3 meters in depth, a professional engineer is required to design the structure. Keep in mind that soil conditions can change over time and are affected by the weather and other conditions. For instance, the walls of a trench are not safe because they are frozen. Soil may slough if it becomes wet or loosens as it dries out. Did you know clay can be extremely treacherous if dried by the sun? Large chunks of material can break off a trench wall after being stable and solid for a long period of time. Whatever the soil type or condition, no one should enter an excavation until it is safe to do so. When you're working in an excavation, watch for changing conditions. If you notice soil that is cracking and falling in, or soil that is so moist it is sloughing and there are no stabilization controls in place, it is your responsibility to notify your supervisor or other manager immediately. You also need to consider the condition and placement of the spoil pile when you enter an excavation. The leading edge of the pile must be at least 1 meter from the edge of the open excavation, and the pile must not exceed a 45-degree angle measured vertically. Any loose materials must be removed from the pile. An unsafe spoil pile can fall into the trench and trap workers or damage facilities. Safety in an excavation depends on many factors, one being adequate access and egress. Every excavation must have at least 2 ways out. These can be stairs or ramps that are part of the excavation itself, or if that's not possible, ladders can be used. Ladders must be secured at both the top and bottom to prevent slipping or falling, and they must be long enough to have at least 3 rungs extend past the lip of the excavation. A longer excavation or ditch that is deeper than 1.5 meters must have an access-egress point within 8 meters of a worker, and they must be spaced not farther than 15 meters apart. Where there is an obstruction in the ditch, such as a pipeline, access-egress points must be located on both sides of the excavation. A hazard assessment of the excavation should note these factors as critical and should also consider a trench as a confined or restricted space and treat it accordingly. A review of your company's policies and procedures regarding confined and restricted spaces will help ensure that the appropriate assessments and controls are put in place to protect against contaminated atmosphere. A review and update of hazard assessments must be completed if conditions change. A single rainfall can completely change the conditions of an excavation by exerting water pressure on the soil and increasing the likelihood of a cave-in. Implementing a water management plan as part of the overall project plan is a proactive step that will ensure rainwater is kept away from excavations and is discharged appropriately. We may not be able to eliminate weather hazards, but we can work to control and manage this hazard. It's important to remember that a worker does not have to be completely buried in soil to be seriously injured or killed. Workers who have been buried only as far as their waist have died as a result of soil pressure on their bodies. Did you know, should a trench fail with workers entrapped, do not attempt a rescue with mechanical equipment. This would greatly increase injury or likelihood of death to any entrapped worker. Backfilling an excavation poses many of the same risks as the initial excavation process. Before backfilling begins, always check the area for workers, equipment, and tools. Use a spotter to prevent equipment contact and monitor for rocks and other debris that might damage existing or newly installed facilities during the backfill process. As part of the ground disturbance process, the most important step is to not miss a step. The consequences of taking a shortcut could be very serious and greatly affect you, your family, and community at large, as well as your company. Ground disturbance can be conducted safely and without incident when competent, trained personnel take the time to properly plan and execute the excavation, follow established rules, regulations, and industry best practices, and conduct appropriate hazard assessments. Do it right, and don't let your dig bury you.